Hello, thank you for clicking on the video. If you aren't aware, this is the second part of a series of videos. Link to the first one will be popping up on screen somewhere, and a link to it will be in the description below. I highly recommend watching that first video because I just jumped straight into things with no recap, so highly recommend it or you're going to be kind of lost. If you have already seen the first one, thanks for coming back, and let's get right into it. Crossed number 3. The heads up, this is easily the worst issue in the entire volume in my opinion. What happens here kind of takes things a little too far, to the point where I think it undercuts the overall point Ennis was trying to make. But we'll get into that. So it opens up with our group trapped hiding behind a bunch of vehicles as a group of crossed, potentially the ones from before, are very close looking for them. They are attempting to stay quiet while being in a state of sheer panic until Sydney gives the sign that they are leaving, elaborating that they must be hunting someone else. Stan narrates that usually after having close encounters like that, they normally wait a minimum of 2 hours before they even move, and at that time they had made it 4, and that eventually, when they were hiding, they heard about a dozen shots and then complete silence. No screaming. Then they heard engines that were loud at first and then went away. And then they gave it 2 more hours. While he's doing that, we get to see that the group is scavenging the nearby stores for any supplies where they find nothing. One of the survivors in the group, the guy with the red hat, who, I'm going to be quite frank, do not know his name. I don't think it's ever stated, and up until this point he has literally said nothing and just been in the background of a couple panels here and there. He notices a can of some type laying in debris out in the middle of the street where he walks out. While doing so, Geoff tries to warn him to stay in cover. As he reaches for the can, he ends up stepping on a bear trap, and as he starts to scream, an arrow immediately plunges through his neck. He collapses to the ground. The group sees the shot came from a roof and immediately open fire on the person standing up there. The person tumbles to the ground. Sydney tells Kittrick to get to a roof and watch for trouble, and almost immediately a bunch of kids start to run out. Stan then jumps in front of the group, telling them not to shoot as he's noticed that the kids are not crossed, where they then see that the shooter is a small, frail woman who is begging them not to hurt the children and that they are hers. She then says that her name is Ann Cook and that she was the children's kindergarten teacher and that she's all they have. She then tells Stan that she has a safe place with medical supplies. Kittrick tells the group that so far he doesn't see anything. Stan then asks the woman why she shot Mr. Red Hat. She says to stop him from screaming and that she traps and shoots. No noise, no crossed. And that she wasn't planning on hitting a big group like theirs, but the kids were hungry. The situation then starts to dawn on our survivors as the kids tell them not to hurt Miss Cook. We then cut to later in the night, and we're at the teacher and children's hideout, which is some sort of service tunnel underneath a bridge, where Sydney is questioning the woman, now horribly wounded and being bandaged up. She's questioning them about the trap she had set, asking the teacher if she taught the children that. The teacher then elaborates that she had to, just in case something happened to her, and that none of this is the children's fault, not to hurt them. Sydney then coldly replies that there's not much left to be done to them from where she's looking. The teacher then continues, stating that there was no food and that they were children, and what else was she supposed to do? Stan then asks Geoff about her condition, and Geoff simply replies that since Scott was the paramedic, he can't say. Scott, of course, being the guy Randall done in the last issue. And then go to the teacher, explaining that the day it began, she was in class with the children, and she had to take the few that she couldn't hide, and that the crossed were everywhere, and she could do nothing but watch as the kids started to starve. And once the crossed moved on, all the stores had been looted empty. She had run into other groups, but they had given nothing for the children. And then when she came upon a man on his own, he had just cursed at her and raged about the kids once he saw them. She then killed him and searched him and found nothing, but that's when she got the idea to start setting the traps. and that's all there was in order to feed the kids, as she felt she couldn't go cross-country with them, especially since she didn't have an actual gun. She then again asked Sydney not to blame the children and state again that it wasn't them. We then get a flashback to back when Sydney, Stan, Kelly, and Thomas first got together, where we get a wide shot of a highway where absolute chaos is breaking out. The group is overlooking this, where Stan then tells Sydney she was absolutely right about ditching the truck. Then Sydney and Stan and Thomas and Kelly start having their separate conversations, where Stan basically thanks Sydney for everything she's done for them, and that basically she's the leader of their group, being the only one who seems to have any real idea of what she's doing. And Kelly begs Thomas to look after her since she doesn't have anybody else, starting their close bond. While all this is going on, they get ambushed by a police officer who, fortunately, is not infected. However, he takes the rifle that Sydney has and escorts them back to a group of survivors that he has found. This, of course, being everyone else that we've seen so far up until this point. While on the approach, Stan asks Sydney if she still has her pistol, where she calmly replies, "Let's just see how this plays out." The cop explains that he found the other survivors hiding out down a hill, same as the four of them, where we get to see Geoff and Joel's first meeting with our group. Thomas then asks the police officer what he intends to doing. Police officer then explains that he wants to get a group organized. While doing so, Sydney notices that he has a prisoner in the back of the car, and it is explained that the prisoner is actually one of the infected, that he had crashed his car and knocked himself unconscious, and the cop, figuring it was just a DUI, had thrown him in the back of the vehicle. We then cut to the present, where Kittrick is sitting solemnly, teary-eyed to himself, quite despondent looking. This will be important later. Take note of this. While the rest of the group decides and talks about, well, in all actuality, Sydney is just telling the group what she is going to do about those children. And most of the group is absolutely arguing against it, not wanting to settle on that outcome. Geoff states that he feels like they ought to do right by the teacher, and that she was in an impossible situation, and that she was honest with them, and that there were no traps or anything else after the initial incident. Where Sydney remarks, but that was after they had shot her. Kelly then states that she agrees with Sydney. Thomas is absolutely shocked, but Kelly rebuttals against Thomas's objections, stating that they aren't really little kids anymore, and that there's no way for them to rehabilitate them, and that if they just move on, they'll either starve, be taken by the crossed, or will survive the way that the teacher showed them, which means they'll be a hazard to other survivors. Geoff then begins to argue that they should take the children with them, and the blonde woman, who up until this point, like Mr. Red Hat before, has just been sitting in the background, objects to the idea of taking them with them. Sydney also objects, stating that she won't have the children around Patrick, no matter what. She then tells Stan to take Patrick and give her 2 minutes. While the group is leaving, Stan looks back, runs in as Sydney starts to shoot the kids, one by one. This is the part that really kind of sours the story for me to a fair degree. I mean, the comic overall. Because the execution is brutal, and as the panels show, it is one by one. You know, the first kid, sure, isn't aware, goes in their sleep. But as you see, the rest of them wake up and in shock and horror. And then Stan runs in and just immediately starts opening up. And while this is going on, he basically narrates his excuse for it, stating that he didn't bother to imagine the people that they had killed, or entertain the idea that if they don't see it, the kids didn't do it, or all the ways they could be saved. Instead, he just accepted to himself that the world was never coming back, and this is the way things are, as he guns down to crying children. And that's how this volume ends. And you know what's one of the major things that bothers me about this, like the cold execution for the children? It's also the fact that, as far as I read it, the teacher showed them how to do the trap. At no point was it ever explicitly stated that the children had ever actually hurt anybody. And I'm pretty sure that's what the teacher was trying to emphasize. Kids hadn't done anything yet. And if you look back at the scene where the ambush happens, the children aren't on the roof with her. They're down on the ground level, hiding behind a corner. They're doing the same as Sydney with Patrick. I feel like this is the point where, like, it pushes a little too far into the edge. I mean, you already had the stuff with Joel and his family. Like, that was a bit much, but okay. And then you got this on top of it. Part of my problem with this is this sort of takes the wind out of having any sort of ability to root for the main character, Stan or Sydney. And it really sours the rest of the group too, as they just let it happen. It's like, I have no interest in seeing these people survive at this point. Like, at this point, and it is tropey, and it is in part point of the comic, and usual zombie trope, the people tend to be worse than the actual monsters, blah, 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 blah. But I just feel like it's overkill. Kind of feels unnecessary, and there were absolutely other solutions to this problem that didn't involve brutally gunning down the children one by one, so they all die in, like, fear and panic. Awful. But with that out of the way, we can move on to the rest of the series, so let's get to it. Alright, so number 4 opens up the shot at night. There are survivors inside what looks to be an apartment or office building of some sort. Sydney and Stan are talking about their next moves, which will involve attempting to cross the Rocky Mountains. So clearly at this point they've gotten a decent ways west from wherever it was they originally started. Stan begins talking about how they're going to need a ton of supplies to make it over the mountains. Stan is proposing to stop in Denver for supplies to get over the mountains, but Sydney objects, as the cities are kill zones, even though, as Stan points out, most of the small towns have been completely picked clean of supplies. With Sydney also stating that they've got to stay out in the open areas if they want to make it all the way to Alaska, as places like large urban areas will be too easy to get boxed in. We then get to see that the rest of the group is keeping their distance from them, as does Stan, with Sydney telling him it's because they killed the children. We then get some narration, with Stan excusing killing the children, stating that it was the only right thing to do in the situation. Kinda disagree, but already went into that. While at the end of his narration, also admits how the justification crumbled in his own mind once the gunshots started to ring out. He then tells Sydney that Patrick's a good kid, and she tells him not to be making more of we than there is, with Stan looking quite despondent. In response, it hasn't been obvious at this point, Stan pretty much from the get-go copped feelings for Sydney. He then goes and takes over watch for Kittrick, where we then get to cut to some time later where we get to see a very large crossed yelling horsecock as he beats another crossed with a severed horse penis, while Sydney and Stan watch on a roof, and we see that this large crossed, as well as a group of others and survivors they have captured, are standing on the top of 2 semi-trucks, with one of the semi-trucks having a hole cut in its roof. Stan and Sydney are obviously speculating on what the hell the crossed are doing and why the large one was beating the other one, which was apparently to stop him from hurting one of their captives, as well as wondering why the captives haven't been killed already. Stan then comments how the entire crew of infected crossed are in between them and the bridge they need to cross, as that's their only way west without a massive detour, and that they can't really afford to do that. Stan then proposes fighting them, as there seems to only be 5 of them, and they seem to only have handguns. Sydney then states that it isn't worth the risk, where they then notice towards the start of the bridge there's what looks to be a cross with a very small shape next to him. We then get to see that this is of course a crossed man who is now yelling at Horsecock, saying that he wants to see what's going on. Horsecock, who calls this cross face and stump to look out. We then see that the small silhouette is in fact a fat bald man who's had his legs and arms amputated, as well as his eyes removed, and he doesn't talk, he just makes random noises. They then start to see that the crossed on top of the semi have started throwing their captives overboard into the open container and have dumped a bunch of knives in. Stan questions what they're doing. Sydney then states that they forced themselves on some of the survivors and left some others alone. They drop them all in together and wait for the ones that were forced on to become infected as their method of gaining recruits and having their fun with survivors. We then cut to a flashback back to when the group is with the policeman, and we get a close-up of the cross that he has in his car, with Sydney questioning the cop why he took the cross prisoner. He states that he had him in the car before he started showing the marks on his face, and once he realized what was going on, he cuffed him before he woke up. But he kept him alive so he could ask him questions, as when the cross awoke, it apparently knew stuff about the policeman's wife. We then see that the rest of the survivors are talking about what they should do next, and if the cross has said anything useful at all, where of course the answer is no. We then go back to the cop who explains to Sydney that it said terrible things about his wife and what they were going to do to her. She then interrupts him to ask, "Did it know your wife's name?" He says no, and so she states, "It probably just noticed your wedding ring and started talking shit." And then go back to the rest of the group where they are continuing their conversation, and Thomas states that they should probably keep moving, as well as Patrick being a good little boy and sharing his food with Amy and Erwin. Which then we get to cut back to the cop who is now yelling and arguing with Sydney about killing the cross in his car. The cross then starts laughing maniacally, and the cop, starting to throw a tantrum, climbs into his car and starts yelling and questioning the cross, who then starts taunting him about his wife, and before the cop can do anything, spits in his eye. The cop then immediately starts freaking out and opens fire in the car, gets out of the car, and starts randomly firing off, yelling not to touch the weapons, and then he begins to collapse to the ground. Sydney shoots the cross in the police car. She then goes to check on the cop, sees that he is starting to turn, and puts him out of his misery. She then gets the group organized, tells them not to touch the blood or the bodies, and to grab what they can. We then cut back to our survivors in the present, in the apartment, and they can absolutely hear what is going on in the semi-trucks, where we finally get to hear blonde lady's name. Her name is Sheena, and it is explained by Stan in his narration that the deputy in the flashback hadn't been the only person they'd seen turn like that. That Sheena's first group that she was with was mostly cops and firefighters. They had tried beating one of the cross until it gave them answers, and out of that incident, she was the only survivor. The group at this point, waiting for the sun to go down, are discussing what Stan and Sydney saw earlier, where Kelly chimes in that they're like people, but a bit different, obviously, because of the deranged murdering and all, and that some can obviously think things through, and others just act on their impulses. And since they've got a lot of time on their hands, since there's less and less people, they have way more time to turn on each other, as well as plan out what they'd like to do to survivors that they come across. Geoff then speculates what if they learn to hide. Sydney then interrupts this all and tells them that they're looking for a rule book that doesn't exist and that they need to get moving soon. Thomas then asks her what the plan is, and then she tells them that they're going to wait for the darkest point of night, and then they're going to attempt to cross the bridge, sneaking by the group across. We then cut to the bridge itself, where they have found that there is a singular beam going across that they are going to have to climb. And they begin so one by one, where Thomas, the first one to go, remarks that the beam itself is pretty loose and that they need to be careful. We cut back to down the bridge, where our crossed group is sitting, and the one that is apparently Stumpy apparently begins to notice something and starts making noise, which alerts the rest of them as they're having their lovely evening meal. Most of the group at this point, though, is already across the beam, with Geoff and Kelly now on it. Sydney and Stan, hearing the stumped one's noises before immediately realize what's going on, and the rest start to panic as they see the lights from the group approaching. Stan and Sydney on the other side of the bridge draw their rifles and get ready to shoot, while Kelly panics as Geoff and Thomas try to reassure her just to keep walking forward and that she won't fall as the cross group gets closer and closer. Once they're in range, Stan and Sydney open fire, with Sheena being the last one left, begging Kelly to hurry up. Sheena then jumps on the beam once Kelly makes it fully across, but unfortunately at this point the beam completely gives out, and she is left dangling on the opposite side of the bridge, with the cross quickly approaching. Sydney asks Sheena if she would like her to put her out of her misery real quick, and Sheena, seeing the group of Crossed quickly approaching, lets go and plummets to her death on her own. The group then keeps moving, with the Crossed at the other end of the bridge yelling out to him that they are going to get him, as well as letting him know that they've noticed that Stan and Sydney have a kid and that they are coming for them. And that is the end of part 4. Overall, I think this is a pretty decent entry. There's gruesomeness, but now that I kind of feel like the angst is out there and we have our villains introduced for the rest of the series, our main antagonistic group of Crossed, we actually have a plot that can get moving now. It's not just random event. There's a set villain now, and it's at this point where, at least in my opinion, the comic really starts to pick up in quality and become more of an actual entertaining read rather than just, ooh, what awful gory stuff I'm gonna see next. I'm still dowered by the fact that, yeah, they killed kids, so I don't really care if these people live or die, but the group of Cross that we have as our main villains are fairly entertaining. I didn't comment on it before, but the first big panel of the little guy and the amputee, every time I see it, it cracks me up. So I can't really show it. But I mean, he's just wearing a loincloth made out of a face that his bits are dangling through the mouth of. I know it's supposed to be disturbing, and I guess it technically is, but it's just so ridiculous. I can't help but find it funny. And if you were getting tired of the flashbacks, don't worry, we're pretty much about at the end of them. Might be a couple more. And without ado, let's get moving on to the next one. Before we really get into it, special shout out to this one's cover art, at least just the version I had. This goes really hard. Which is funny because this is a filler entry. It's okay though, despite being filler, this is actually one I kind of like. So we get to see that with the opening page, it is now winter, and with the narration that accompanies it, our group is in the Rockies. And that they hadn't seen another human being in a month, or any Crossed in over a week. And that waiting for spring felt like suicide, and that's why they were attempting to cross the mountains in the snow. While walking along their path, Thomas comments on how beautiful it is, and while commenting on how beautiful he finds the mountains in wintertime, he says that he gets the world still good, and that he means the world, not ... where Kelly remarks that it always was. Thomas tells Sydney that he doesn't like the look of Kittrick. Sydney confirms, saying that Kittrick doesn't want to live, at least not enough. We get a shot of Kittrick, as always, looking dour and sad, like normal. Well, more so than normal, I guess. Stan follows up, I want an either after, and he changes the subject to probably flu. Comments on how none of them have any proper weather gear. Sydney says that there was no chance of getting proper gear since there were lights in the last 2 towns they crossed. She then inquires about Geoff, where Stan remarks that Geoff is doing the best that he can, where we see that Geoff is actually sick and sneezing, possibly with the flu. Stan then comments that the air seems a lot cleaner up here, and he asks Sydney if she finds it weird that things aren't worse, such as every nuke or power plant in the world not being set off by now. Sydney then speculates that the government might have done something to prevent that from happening, as well as the fact that anybody with the knowledge to do so might not have been turned, at least right away. We then get some more narration as the group is continuing to walk along, that the fear of the nuclear strikes and detonations was something that they thought about at the first few weeks, that then faded into a mystery as to why it never happened, and that they never got word of more than 3 or 4 reactors going critical, as well as further speculating that obviously the rest of the world, that didn't happen. The narration continues with him saying at one point that they came across a former CNN anchor who said that just before everything went down, a Pakistani jet dropped a bomb on New Delhi, but the Indians had self-control and didn't retaliate. However, every warhead in Israel was sent off at once, and that had happened 2 days after the group first met together and started running, and that Israel's strike had hit every major country in the Middle East, with Stan joking that peace had finally come to the Middle East. Ha ha ha, tee hee hee. Although, funnily enough, hindsight totally sounds like something the current Israeli government would totally do. We then end the narration with the group taking shelter in a tipped-over bus as the snow starts to fall, and Stan telling Sydney that she made a good call taking shelter in there as the snow is getting particularly heavy, and they would have had trouble getting anywhere in it. They then start to have a very personal conversation where Stan talks to Sydney about how good of a kid he finds Patrick to be, as well as trying to reassure her that he's not just trying to flirt with her and butter up to her, and that he doesn't understand why when she has this whole ice woman tough as hell routine, and that he doesn't quite understand why she sees the point in teaching him to have good manners. She follows that up with telling him that after experiencing the abuse of her husband, she wanted to make sure that Patrick would never grow up to be like that. Sydney then tells Stan that his insights are flying thick and fast tonight, which he then responds that he just has a feeling that he's gonna see her smiling one of these days. Where she responds it won't be at him, and it'll be the moment that she gets to relax. We then cut to another flashback. I do believe this is actually the last one, I promise. And it's a very short one, too. The group is walking along after Sydney has executed the police officer, and the young guy whose name we never got is freaking out over it, basically, while Joel himself starts to spurg out about how the kid's an idiot for freaking out about the consequences of shooting the cop. Geoff gets Joel to quit hassling the kid, and the group moves on. When both Thomas and Stan go to take a piss together, I guess, and they start engaging in small talk, where Stan comments that he finds it weird that Thomas didn't go to the bar that he worked at very often. Where then Thomas goes on a diatribe about how racist the people that frequented that bar are, as well as homophobic, and that he's gay, because, of course. I don't care that a character's gay, but I just don't see the point. Like, yeah, they have a conversation here about how he's gay, and like, yeah, they have a bonding moment over it. I'm not going to go into full detail, but just to quickly give his backstory. Thomas came to the town they were in to take care of his mom, who died just a couple of weeks before the outbreak happened, right as he was about to leave town. They start to have a joke about it, but anywho, back to this little tangent. Like, I don't care that a character's gay. It's just these panels, they have a conversation where they make such a big deal about it and the homophobia he's faced being in the Midwest. And at no point in Thomas's arc is the fact that he's gay ever relevant. It's never relevant at any point in the overall plot, and it's not relevant to Thomas's arc as a character. You could cut out that conversation entirely, and it would make no difference in the story. Like, it wouldn't change Thomas's character in any way. If you just left in that, I was only here because I was taking care of my mom and she died, and like, this sucks because this broke out just as I was about to leave and go back to my normal life. Like, that's all we really needed for Thomas. Didn't need that he was gay, unless that's an explanation for why him and Kelly aren't romantically involved, but you didn't need that either. He could have just felt bad for her, or he could have just known her from frequenting the diner. As Stan already said in the beginning, they all already knew each other's names. Come on. You could have just made them more of like actual friends. Goofy writing here. Atypical comic book preachy writing. And I do have to knock it for it. At least in my opinion. But anyways, they have their little talk and little bro bonding moment. And we cut back to the rest of the group as they walk back, where they're speculating on how the virus is spread and what exactly it's doing to people. Where the nameless guy goes on about how he heard on the radio that it was Judgment Day, it's an act of God and all that. Where Stan remarks that he've heard that kind of crap before and it's never been true before, so why would it be true now? Blah, blah, blah. Sydney takes control or leadership of the group and tells everyone that they're going to do things her way or they can leave. Nobody does. The nameless guy asks Stan if he wants him to carry the gun for him. Stan says okay. And then Stan narrates after that same night, the guy shot himself and nobody knew his name. Literally pointless. This was probably the most pointless flashback and absolutely was not needed. Like, that could have been trimmed. Again, it's a filler volume though, so what do you expect? Anyways, we cut to the next day. After they've taken shelter in the bus in the modern day, where Stan, Thomas, and Kelly are having a joking conversation discussing who they're going to eat, Kittrick or Geoff, where Thomas remarks that wouldn't that be the height of irony, them eating people to stay alive in a world of killer, grapey cannibals. Where then he also makes a joke of who Stan would like to eat, which then proceeds to cause him and Stan to engage in their little FUs back and forth that we saw in Volume 1. Not Volume 1. Issue 1. And this is played off by Kelly and them as being cutesy, even though not really, because they're just saying FU back and forth. Sydney then remarks that they're getting way too strung out and need to close up. Thomas then asks her if she thinks there's any up here, with Stan commenting that he'd figure the high country would have been abandoned a while back since there wouldn't be anyone for them to get their hands on. She says it's not that, it's because of Geoff and Kittrick. She's worried about them, that they won't make it. We then cut to later in the evening where they have set up tents, with Stan asking Thomas how Kittrick and Patrick are doing. He informs him that they are sleeping together in the same tent trying to share body heat, and that he wishes they could heat something up for them to eat, with Stan commenting that it's too risky to light a fire, as well as the fact that since there's no clouds, it's going to be a beautiful night. We then get some narration from Stan that it seems like the place they were in and the lack of any encounters had gotten to even Sydney, and everyone had started to let their guard down, and that they had bothered to set camp before the sun had even set, which they normally wouldn't do, as to not be sitting still. Anyone wandering came up on them. Stan, after the narration ends, asks Thomas where Sydney is, informs him that she took Patrick up to watch the sunset. A while after the sun has gone down, Stan tells Thomas it's been over an hour, so he's going to go take a look. We then get some panels. Stan walking up to find Sydney and Patrick sitting, where Sydney motions to Stan to stay quiet, and we probably get what is one of the best pieces in the entire comic, as well as, at least for me, one of the best emotional payoffs with these next couple of panels and pages. Like, the artwork here I think is pretty good. Like, the detail's nice and everything, but with the color palette as well as the conversation and framing around them seeing the wolves, gives an almost dreamlike quality to it. We're not seeing things as they actually were. We're seeing this as one of the last few beautiful memories Stan has in his mind as he is recounting the story. He then asks her why they're just sitting there. The wolves, of course. She says she doesn't really know other than this must be their place, and that she never had time to show him things like this in their previous life. We then get more narration from Stan that this is when he started to realize that the world wasn't completely turning into hell, and that the idea that dawned on him then of people being gone and the cross being wiped out after them would make the earth clean, and is the closest thing that's given him to believing there is a reason for everything that is happening, and that this is something he's never said aloud, and at this particular moment he's never shared with anybody. And that is the end of part 5. Honestly, despite a filler entry where not much actually happens, I did like it, because you have 5 issues of some pretty bleak stuff. So to get this much levity, especially if you read this all back to back like I have, it's a nice break. You kind of need it. I'd also like to mention that, to further reiterate when I was talking about the scene with the wolves, kind of interpret that more as that's how Stan sees it in his mind rather than how it actually played out to a certain degree. Because as we see going forward, it's probably going to be the last positive memory he has for a while. Little bit of foreshadowing there. And I think it kind of helps walk back the damage that was done with the incident involving Miss Cook and the children, to help kind of get the story's messaging and theme kind of back on track, which in the next part, gonna do a more thorough breakdown, because you can't really do it without spoiling everything, but we'll get there. And that's gonna be it for today, if you couldn't tell. Part 3 should be out in about a week's time at most. So if you like what you saw here today and in part 1, go ahead and subscribe, like the video if you liked it. Go ahead, leave me a comment. Let me know what do you think about Crossed? Do you think it goes too far? Does it not go far enough? Is the content justified? Does that even matter at all? Go ahead and let me know. I love discussions over that kind of stuff. But that's going to be it. Hopefully I see you next time. Have a nice day.
Oh, I feel your stress.